This episode is brought to you by Progressive. Most of you aren't just listening right now. You're driving, cleaning, and even exercising. But what if you could be saving money by switching to Progressive? Drivers who save by switching save nearly $750 on average, and auto customers qualify for an average of 7 discounts. Multitask right now. Quote today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $744 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2022 and May 2023. Potential savings will vary. Discounts not available in all states and situations.
Hello, friends. Lacey Camp. You're listening to No Small Endeavor. This is our unabridged episode with Rob Reiner and Dan Partland. Rob Reiner, of course, was perhaps first came to fame as Mike Stivic, also known as Meathead, in the 1970s television series All in the Family. And then Rob went on to do some of the greatest films in American cinematography, films like A Few Good Men and This Is Spinal Tap and Princess Bride and so forth. A lot of amazing work that Rob has done. Dan Partland is himself a multiple Emmy Award winner, documentary producer and director, whose work includes things like Welcome to the Dollhouse and the award-winning series The 60s. So Dan and Rob and others teamed up to develop a new documentary called God and Country. It's an exploration of the contemporary rise and the new shape of Christian nationalism in the United States. I've done a lot of work in my own field in theology and academics, exploring things like nationalism, Christian nationalism. I'll do a shameless plug for one of my own recent books called Scandalous Witness that explores that from a theological perspective, Christian theological perspective. But because of that, I've always found fascinating conversations with people of different perspectives. So Dan himself, as he'll say, comes from a Catholic Christian context, but is not a practicing Christian at the moment. And Rob comes from a Jewish background. And yet here they are wanting to talk about Christian nationalism, but they're, as they say, you'll hear them say, they want to do it from the purposes of seeing that it's potentially greatly damaging both to the country and to Christianity. It's a very provocative and I think very helpful and, from my perspective, relatively even-keeled documentary. As I said in the interview, you'll hear me say in this unabridged interview, I thought, if anything, they might have gone a little too easy on some of the Christian nationalists. So I hope you found this interview helpful, instructive, and useful. Enjoy. Dan Partland is a veteran documentary producer and director for film and television. Dan's a 5-time Emmy nominee with 2 Emmys for Best Nonfiction Series, has been twice nominated for Nonfiction Producer of the Year by the Producers Guild of America. Some of his work includes award-winning and celebrated film and television such as Welcome to the Dollhouse, American High Intervention, and the multi-award-winning The 60s. Rob Reiner first came to fame as a 2-time Emmy award-winning actor in the television series All in the Family. Then Rob went on to become an acclaimed director of some of the most influential motion pictures in American film history, including This Is Spinal Tap, A Few Good Men, Ghosts of Mississippi, When Harry Met Sally, The Princess Bride, 20 films in all. Rob's also a dedicated political activist. Today we're discussing the new documentary God and Country, subtitled The Rise of Christian Nationalism, which Dan directed and Rob produced. Welcome, Dan and Rob.
Welcome.
Thanks for having us, Lee.
Yeah, grateful to have you guys with us today. Dan, maybe we could start with you. Would you kind of give us a summary of God and Country?
Well, yeah, God and Country looks at, as you said, the rise of Christian nationalism in the United States. I think I got interested in the subject really because of concerns about what's happened to our politics. Our politics has become incredibly divisive. And digging into it, started to see a lot of strains that were familiar, some of them from other periods in history. And the one thing that was rising to the top was this political bloc that has happened in the United States, and this seeming merging of a political identity with a certain political identity with a Christian identity. And I started digging in, and the more I learned, the deeper I got, and the more I needed to learn.
Yeah. What maybe for you, Rob? What first drew you to care about this project?
This is something that has been floating around in my head for a very long time. A book was sent to me called PowerWorshippers, and that kind of spurred me into wanting to tackle this, because during a time in my life when I was really struggling and having a very tough time in my life, I read virtually every religion. Christianity, Buddhism, I read Krishnamurti. I was reading everything that I could to try to make sense of things. And the one thing that I came away with was the teachings of Jesus, which to me was made the most sense of all, which is, essentially do unto others, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And my dad used to tell me all the time that, you don't really, you got the 10 commandments. You don't really, this one, if you live by this one thing, you don't need the 10 commandments, because this covers everything. You want to treat people as you'd like to be treated. And so I saw over a period of many, many years that these teachings were, people who called themselves, Christian and, believed in that, they seem to be getting so far away from that. This whole idea of, forcing your way of thinking and way of praying on other people, and even willing to, resort to violence to do it. And I saw this happening in January 6th. And I said, well, what is this? Why are we experiencing this? It seems so far away from what I have understood to be the teachings of Jesus. And even though I'm Jewish, I don't think of it myself that way. I think of what do I really believe in humanity, and we're all one, and we all have to treat each other, the same way. And so I saw this, and I went, "What's at the root of all this? Why is this happening?" And when this book came across my, came to my attention, I said, "Okay, I kind of get this now." I saw this happening during the 60s, 70s, and 80s with Falwell and certain other people who were basically saying my way or the highway. If you don't do the thing the way I feel and pray and believe the way I believe, then you're wrong. And so this film to me is a clarion call, basically, to say that any kind of authoritarian movement is not good, is wrong. And that also, when we talk to so many leaders in the Christian world, like Russell Moore, like Phil Vischer, like you mentioned Dumas, all these people were all saying that this movement, this Christian nationalism, is a threat to Christianity. It's not just bad for the country in terms of pushing this authoritarian way about us, but it's also bad for Christianity. It's hurting Christianity. And I thought, this is a message that we need to get out.
Yeah, we think that's a very helpful overview, and we want to unpack a lot of those things that you pointed to there. And before we start doing that, Dan, let me come back to you and ask other sorts of strands of experience that have also informed your kind of interest in this particular project.
Well, look, Rob gave a great overview. I'll take it in a slightly different direction, which is when I started thinking about taking this on, I was reading everything in sight, and I personally, I come from an interfaith background. I'm a largely secular person, and I can talk about that also. But I really wanted to, when the producers approached me, I said, well, the most important thing to me is that this would be a pro-Christian movie. This can't be a movie about that seems to be assailing anyone's faith. Christianity is probably the greatest faith tradition. I mean, it's the biggest one for sure on the planet. And I'm just close to too many people who are deeply devout and for whom that's just a really central part in their life. So I met with a trusted friend and colleague, a guy who I worked with, essentially my right-hand man for 10 years, And I said, and he's deeply devout, grew up as a Christian missionary around the world. And I told him, we had lunch and we checked in on all kinds of other things. And then I said, but I also really want to get your take on this. I'm thinking about doing a film about Christian nationalism. And his demeanor just shifted. He just went white. And and I was nervous because I didn't know if I'd crossed some line or if I'd said something or he was going to be offended. And he said, wow, well, it's tearing the country apart and it's tearing apart the church. And that was a revelation to me right from the beginning. I mean, and then he said, thank you for taking this on. And I said, should I even be taking it on? He said, somebody has to do this. And it's very, very hard for people who are very devout to take this on. But when he said that it was also tearing apart the church, that was a revelation to me. That was obviously the kind of thing that only somebody, an insider, somebody who's deeply in the church, that was an insight that they would have. And so really from that moment on, I was determined to understand that and also to find the voices who would see it from that perspective. Because I had only been seeing it sort of from a secular political perspective beforehand.
So I'm wondering, has it surprised you, either of you, that even just in the last week, for example, so last week, Rob, I saw that you released the trailer on social media, and there was this kind of immediate backlash. And so, for example, one prominent YouTuber replied and said something like, "Why does a Jewish, agnostic, Hollywood elitist care about Western Christianity in middle Southern USA? Seems like maybe you hate Christians." And so, I mean, obviously, you've already begun with a kind of posture of that certainly is not your intention, but already you're getting this kind of immediate response. So has that surprised you?
No, it hasn't surprised me based on what Dan was talking about, the division that we have in our country, that we're not even allowing the other person to have a thought or to talk about it. We're dismissing things out of hand without even looking at something and seeing what the point of view is. The first instinct, especially on social media, is to attack, is to besmirch, is to diminish somebody. And so it didn't surprise me that that's the reaction we got. And I knew, because based on the fact that, and I, like Dan, I'm secular. I'm not, I'm not a practicing Jew. I'm very good at it. No, I mean, I'm not, I'm not a religious person in that way. But I do believe, like I said, I do believe deeply in the teachings of Jesus. I do believe that. And I don't espouse it as, I'm a Christian, I'm a Jew. It's just human. It's a human thing to say you want to treat people the way you'd like to be treated. That's a very human thing. And so, no, it didn't surprise me. But I would hope that people would take a look at the film and see what it really has to say. And people might say it's very disturbing, it's very upsetting, but if you watch the film, it's very hopeful at the end, because what it says at the end is, if we can get back to those teachings, if we can get back to the real core teachings of Jesus, then maybe we'll have a great world. We could have a really great world.
Yeah. Dan, has the initial backlash surprised you?
Well, no, it's always a little bit surprising at the amount of vitriol that's out there. I think that's just part of the tenor of our age and something about the online community that we've created. It didn't surprise me that it would get that there would immediately be hostile reactions to it. Part of that really just is the era that we live in, which is every single project that comes out has some kind of opposition, some storm on social media of people who want to assail it. But we have to remember what we're talking about here. People online trying to discredit a film that they have not seen because they're so certain of what that content is. I think that tells the whole story. It tells the story about how very sensitive the subject matter is, because it is very sensitive. But it also tells the story, in a sense, it is the story of Christian nationalism. There's such a fear of anybody saying anything against what's perceived as our team, that let's rally the troops right now and discredit those people and discredit that project and do everything we can to try to suppress this idea that's in there for something that they don't even know what it is. They haven't even seen.
Yeah. So as you guys worked on this project, were there things that you learned that surprised you?
Can I just actually, before we move on, Lee, I'm sorry to double back on it. The one thing that I do think is really important to say about online discussion is that, I originally came at it from the perspective of just my concern about what was happening to American politics and politics around the world. But, quickly found that this other dimension, it's also happening to what it's doing to the American church. But like any topic, when you get really immersed in it, you just want to find the best and most credible voices on the topic. And most of the best and most credible voices that I found were Christians themselves and people of deep faith. And so, without regard to what their political stripes were, I sought to include all of those people, just the best voices I could find, and make sure that we had, that we weren't guilty of this thing that is going on so much of sort of ideological bubbles.
Yeah.
So we brought in tremendous voices, many of whom you've had on your show before. And what I think is really tragic about the trailer and the state of, our political discourse right now and discourse around this subject is the kind of vitriol that was directed at those speakers, especially the most devout speakers. That's a terrible irony, terrible tragedy. And they were so brave and courageous for speaking up and speaking candidly on this sensitive subject matter, but they have been, they get raked through the coals for participating in the project, again, even before anyone has seen it. So, I'm very, very grateful to them for their for sharing their wisdom, their insights in the project, but also just for a tremendous amount of courage in coming forward, because they certainly knew what sort of reaction they were going to get.
Yeah. So with the unfolding of the project, were there particular things about Christian history, American history, contemporary American politics that you all learned that was new to you or that surprised you? Maybe to you, Rob.
Well, not really. The one thing that, we talk about in the film is this idea of this wonderful democracy that we have created here in this country that's, certainly in fits and starts. We've had our problems, but the whole idea, and you look at the preamble of the Constitution, in order to create a more perfect union, and every step of the way, we find ourselves trying to improve things, trying to make it better, trying to make it more e pluribus unum, out of the many one. And we are a very disparate group of people. And when you look at the Constitution, you see there's no establishment of religion. They talk about it 3 times in the Constitution, the idea of separation of church and state. And when we started working on this, the thing that shocked me a little bit was the Christian nationalist movement says there is, it's not mentioned in the Constitution that this is a Christian nation and this is what we should be. And I kept thinking that how is that possible when you have Muslims and Jews and Buddhists and Christians? They're all living in America and they're all human beings and they all have a right to practice the religion they want to. And that's the beauty of America. That's what's so beautiful about this country, that we're allowed to give each other that freedom to express ourselves the way we want, and that we don't want to force our way down other people's throats. That's not the way a pluralistic society works. And so we have this wonderful opportunity as the beacon to the world to show, look, we can all live together peacefully. And isn't this a wonderful way to spread our way of thinking around the world? And with Christians who go to other countries to be able to bring people to the religion, they don't do it at gunpoint. They don't. You don't go to African nations or South America, wherever you're going to go, and say you have to believe this. You're spreading your ideas. You're saying this is what we think. What do you think? Is this something you'd like to be part of? And people can make the choice. And so here you have this Christian nationalism, which basically says my way or the highway. And you have to, and I'm willing to take up arms and force, my way of thinking on others. That was a big surprise for me to see that people who call themselves Christian nationalists say, I'm willing to use violence or anything that it takes to make people believe the way I believe, and that the country has to be that way. That makes no sense to me.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the definition of Christian nationalism, and let's come to you, Dan, on this. It seems to me that you all have kind of two significant moves in kind of defining Christian nationalism in the film. And the first one is kind of just this general idea that America, the United States, has a special place in the work of God in human history, and that historically this is typically taken kind of messianic or salvific language, that the country itself is a sort of player in the salvation of the world that's identified with America. The Christian salvation kind of notions are attached to the United States as Messiah, and then you kind of take a second move where that in earlier decades that sort of nationalist idea had celebrated and been deeply allied with democratic principles, or democratic, at least trying to work within democratic practices and institutions. But now more recently, it's a move to potentially reject democratic institutions and principles, and believe that we might need to set aside democracy in order to have an upholding of an authoritarian Christian state. Is that accurate, or do you want to fill that out some, or would you fill that out some for us?
That's accurate. I mean, I'll try to take a simpler definition of it, but absolutely one of the hardest parts of this project and of talking about this subject is just defining what it means. People have a general sense, they think they know, they're not really sure what they mean. Marjorie Taylor Greene is out there proudly declaring herself a Christian nationalist. I'm not really sure what she means. I'm not sure if she means the same thing that I think it means. Look, religious nationalism is on the rise right now all over the globe. It's nothing new. It's happened, it happens in every different country. The form it takes in the United States is Christian nationalism. And what it is about, both in the United States and elsewhere, is about really privileging one religious people in a country over other people, right? That creating a higher class of citizens, that Christians in the United States should enjoy a higher privilege in our society because our country is inherently Christian, and that should mean a greater say in law and culture and everything else. In the United States, as you pointed out, it has this other dimension, this other overlay that additionally complicates it and makes it stronger, which is this feeling that the United States plays a specific and important role in human history, that it is unique on the planet in terms of its ability to help God realize his vision for the world, right? So I could see how, if you believe those two things, you could go to great lengths to make sure that that his will is done, or what you see as his will, right? So I think the trajectory that I went on in this project was really, really interesting because I started just by immersing myself in these Christian nationalist circles. And by the way, very few people actually identify as Christian nationalists. It's more a series of traits and influences that most Americans, there's been all kinds of great research data that says most Americans have at least some kind of Christian nationalist tendency, that they believe something about the founding of the country and the importance of Christianity in it. And most of that is totally benign. But there is this growing portion of the population that are sometimes called, in Perry and Whitehead's research, they're called the ambassadors of Christian nationalism. This could be as high as maybe 25% of the country that are really out there, who really, really are doing what Rob is talking about, which is setting aside the idea that a democratic society should make decisions by persuasion and just wanting to assert their power and authority. And most people, I think, most people who so many good, well-meaning Christians are in some way unwittingly, and non-Christians are in some way unwittingly, I think, participating in that in little bits and pieces. So the trajectory I went on, I think, was that by immersing myself so much in this community, I really did start to take on a lot of the ideas. And I thought, I mean, it is a Christian nation. It does say, in the Declaration, it says, endowed by their Creator. And, it's people are pointing out that separation between church and state is not literally, those words are not written in the Constitution. They're written in a letter, what's known as the Danbury Letter from Thomas Jefferson to the Danbury Baptists. But, and Jefferson's call to prayer is another thing. There's all of this kind of pseudo history that has been used in this movement to try to justify it. And it's all, I call it pseudo history because it all has some element of truth. But when I dug into it, it just couldn't be more explicit that none of those references about the founding fathers were really true. Really was, they made tremendous efforts in the founding of the country to make sure that it wasn't a Christian nation because they believed in pluralism, and everything about the design of the Constitution and about what America was designed to really embrace pluralism, because even before they wrote the Constitution, this country was already inherently pluralistic. You can't unscramble the omelet. We're already here and mixed together different faiths.
Can I
Rob,
add
comments on that?
Yeah, can I add something on top of that? I mean, the people came to this country, the original settlers that came here to abandon religious persecution. They felt that they were being persecuted on religious basis, and they came to America and eventually fought a revolutionary war, and they very consciously designed a constitution that would not push on the citizens of the country the kind of persecution that they themselves had escaped from. So they very consciously put in the document that the government will make no religion, and that there will be no religious test to hold office. These are things that are built into the Constitution because it's based on people who were persecuted on religious grounds. And so, to me, that's the beauty of this country, that there are wise enough people. They weren't wise in all ways, but they were wise enough to know that if you make a religion, if you make a country connected to a specific religion, you could go down the same path of the place that they rejected and that they fled from. And so, to me, it's pretty much baked into to the genesis of this country. And that's what's great about it. And we can build on it. And that's the more perfect union part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. It does seem to me important to distinguish a couple of things here. One being that any given group can see another group trying to use various mechanisms of cultural power to persuade people to move a democracy in a given direction, right? So a fundamentalist conservative Christian could have a certain set of so-called biblical values, and they try to use the mechanisms of democracy to get people to vote their way. Whereas a far left secularist could do the same sort of thing, right? And on both sides, they could kind of pull coalitions of power together to try to influence the democracy. And yet that does seem to be a very different sort of thing than one seeing your particular group and your vision for the country as being necessary for the salvation of the world. And two, then using power to making the next step toward using coercion towards that. And I just want to insert quickly and maybe I'm going to be too inappropriately personal here, but as a Christian and as a Christian theologian, I think in many ways, I'll just say that I think if anything, you were a little too easy on the Christian tradition. And what I mean by that is that you all in the film, you basically look at this phenomenon from the 1950s forward. And the facts are that if you go back just to the early 20th century, somebody like Woodrow Wilson, he was an extreme Christian nationalist and saw the United States as he literally uses language like, now people, after World War I, he said, now people are seeing America as the savior of the world. And he's using explicitly salvific talk, and he saw war as the means to bring about the salvation of the world. And then you can go back, to the early, when some of the first early Christians come to the United States, they use biblical language and they look at the indigenous first peoples as the Canaanites from the Old Testament Hebrew Bible stuff, and their coming and their conquest as the new conquest of the new Israel. You can go back to Charlemagne, right, in 800, who conquers Western Europe and brings a baptismal policy of saying you can either be baptized or we'll kill you. And so, he converts a lot of people because who wants to get killed? And so they get baptized. And so on and on and on, there's this temptation, and it happens in other religious traditions as well, right? But again, I just want to say, I think that you kind of go easy on the Christian tradition. And from my perspective, as people who are not practicing Christians, I kind of appreciate that. But at the same time, you're pointing out and saying, right now we've got a serious problem, and we need to look at the serious problem. So I don't know. Any feedback or thoughts about that?
I think go first.
No, I think the charge here was not to look at far back in the you could look at the Crusades. You can look at all kinds of times in history where people have felt that they're on the moral high ground and they're going to force people to believe the way they want to believe because it's for the ultimate good. I mean, so you can look at those. But we looked at this specifically in America. It galvanized in the 50s. It galvanized with Brown versus the Board of Education, and then ultimately Roe v. Wade. It galvanized as a political movement. It brought together your faith with a political movement and started creating this powerful political entity. And so that in America, because you're right. Woodrow Wilson said those things. There are those kinds of things have been said, but it's never been galvanized the way it was or the way it started to become in America until the 50s, when it really started gaining some major steam.
Well, we tried to do a gloss on the deep history and a deeper dive on the sort of modern version of the movement, because that's the one that we're dealing with right now. But what I'll just say to your comment about maybe going easy on the Christian tradition, I guess I don't really see it that way. I think that we'll need somebody who's much more of a historian than I am to answer this question about whether whether Christianity has done any better or worse than other traditions when they're in power. I think the reason, any group that's been in power for a long time is going to be more responsible for what happens during its time. And so I think that, and more culpable, and therefore also more culpable for bad things that happen during its time. But I think that persuasion has been something that has come up a number of times in this conversation, and that's really what it comes down to is, what if your politics democratic politics have to be about us persuading each other. And I think that a lot of times religion in the current climate, if people start to feel like, well, I don't have to answer that because this is what my faith says. This is what God says. This is what Jesus says. I'm not going to give any answer beyond this is what Jesus is calling us to do. That's problematic for democracy. And I look at actually for guidance on this, because people are always talking about, are you saying that my faith can't, inform my politics? No, of course, people's faith, informs their politics. Absolutely. It informs their moral perspectives and their moral ideas, and it informs their politics. I always look to Dr. King really for how to navigate this, because of course he was, a man of tremendous faith and devotion, but the case that he made to the country wasn't that we should do it this way because this is what his faith said, right? He translated what he felt from his faith into civic arguments that applied to everyone. So he talked about justice, he talked about peace, he talked about humanity, he talked about human dignity. That's how faith could inform political ideas that reaches across to other faiths and other traditions, and to secular people and atheists and everybody else, and makes the case. So I think we have to make sure that we're making kind of civic arguments to each other when we're talking about how we want to structure the civic society. People's spiritual belief is their business. And I was re-looking at some of these early letters from the founders, and that's what it was all about to them, right? Jefferson, in this famous letter to the Danbury Baptists, what he says is, believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, that he owes account to none other for his faith or his worship than the legitimate powers of government, each actions only. I don't want to go into too much Jefferson, but the centerpiece of it, which he says that the legislature should make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, was building a wall of separation between church and state. And that was really to ensure religious liberty. It wasn't to attack people's faith. It wasn't to keep faith out of government or out of civic life. But it was to protect religious liberty, because you can't have a truly religiously free society unless you have a secular government.
Yeah, and think about this for a second. You have, very far left-leaning liberals and very far right-leaning conservatives. Both can be devout Christians. They can both be devout Christians, and they may approach whatever issue, whether it's the environment, it's taxes, it's voting rights, it's abortion rights, whatever they are, they can both be devout and have a different point of view about a particular issue. And so what this wonderful Constitution allows us to do is, so you may have your faith and your religion guiding your thinking on a particular issue, but that's personal to you. And so you may be in the same religion and be very far apart in terms of how you would approach something and how you would get to that conclusion, of a conclusion on a particular issue. That's the beauty of America, that you're allowed to do that. And there should never be a situation where just because of the way you believe and the way you think about your relationship to God should be forced on anybody else, because that person who's on the opposite side politically may have the same kind of faith and the same kind of devotion to God, but may think about a particular issue in a different way than you do. You know what I'm saying? That's the beauty of this country, that it allows you to have differing views, even if you share the same religion.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, from what I know of the history of the notion of separation of church and state, you have in early modernity, you have some Christians who make the case that there needs to be a separation of church and state in order to preserve commitments to Christ. That is, since Christ teaches us to divest ourselves of power over others, authoritarian or violent power over others, that to try to get hold of the levers of oppressive power in the state is therefore to subvert your own faith. At the same time, there were other Christians who rejected that soundly and then ended up persecuting those Christians in the 16th century. And then there were others, kind of early heralds of secular modernism, who made the case for the separation of church and state, because they seemed, in fact, in some of those cases, what they seem to want is a lot of the power and land that the church had, and their agenda didn't always seem, particularly circumspect as well. But what I hear you all making is a kind of a third case about separation of church and state, namely the desire or hope, at least, that there can be a certain kind of pluralism in which there can be a peaceable coexistence and some sort of way of trying to deeply respect the basic convictions of the others. So thoughts or feedback or pushback on any of that?
That's 100%. That's exactly, you said it much more intelligently than I just said, but that's exactly what I was trying to get across.
I'll put that on Facebook. Rob Reiner said I said it much more intelligently than he did.
By the way, everything you're saying is better expressed than how I'm saying it.
The founders, the founders spoke about natural rights, right? That was one of these new Enlightenment ideas, and they were very careful to make sure that they spoke about natural rights and not God-given rights. They, that line in the Declaration that says endowed by their creator. Well, we know we have a previous draft where it was more referred to as a Christian God, and they just lined through it and decided, no, they wanted something that sounded more inclusive, actually, that it was just going to be a creator. I think, one of the interesting things when we go back to what the founders said and also go back to, the Bible, is like, I think when I started this project that I thought that if we could just tell people what it said, what this book says, there's this book over here, this is the Bible, and here's this the other book, it's the Constitution. If we could just really tell them what it said, this would be clear. And of course, as you dig into it, you find out that that's not the case. The Constitution is much less open to interpretation than the Bible, but people take different things from it. And even if they didn't, even if everybody could agree on what those books said and what those things meant, we still have the responsibility of reaching people in the here and now and just connecting with them about what kind of world, what kind of country we want to make and what kind of world we want to make. And so at a certain point, I felt like, wow, I'm going to do all this work to try to make sure people understand what these books are really about. And it's like, well, that also isn't enough. What really has to happen is we have to start a conversation. And that's ultimately the goal of the film, is that we need to be having this conversation. There's another conversation that's going to happen online. Hopefully people will be on good behavior and try to elevate that into something constructive. But we have to talk about what kind of a world we have. And that, I mean that sincerely. I mean, there's a lot of hot issues that are being debated. The effort isn't to In this film, it's not to put your thumb on the scale of one or the other. I mean, trans rights is being debated. That's an important issue. All kinds of issues about gender identity, about race. We're in a great reckoning on those topics right now in the culture. We're in a great reckoning on treatment of women and on the histories of oppression and sexual assault. There's a massive reckoning going on right now. And I think that that's a challenge for all of us to kind of get back to basic principles, whether they're Christian principles or secular ones.
I'm thinking about a book I read years ago. It's called The Home Planet. And it's all of these accounts of the astronauts from all over the world who went up into space. Many of them went to some went to the moon, but certainly they went up into space. And they had American astronauts, they had Chinese, Indian, Russian, from all over the world that they had gone up. And what you hear their accounts, and what they say is when they first go up, they look down at this world that they came from, and they're looking for their country. Where were they? Oh, that's where my country is. And then eventually they stop looking at their country and they look at this little blue marble that they all live on. And they see this as the world, that we're all inhabiting that little blue marble. And those boundaries, those countries' boundaries, they disappear. They completely disappear, and they realize that they're all living in the same place. And to me is really hopefully what America can espouse, which is we can all live in one place and live together and not feel like we have to force our ideas on somebody else or we have to kill somebody over those ideas, that we are all inhabiting this same little blue marble that we can all live together on. And to me, the constructs of the Constitution allows that to happen. It allows that if we allow it to be what it is, and not to try to force our way on somebody else. It always stuck with me as that. That idea, looking at the world from above, and, you want to call that heavenly, you want to call that God, you want to call that perspective, whatever you want to say, but it always struck me. And to me, that's what we have to push for. And Dan says we're divided by all these issues, and we get into the weeds on all these issues, but we have to step back at some point and say, we're all human beings. We're all living on the planet together. We've got to find a way to live and not kill each other, especially not over our ideas. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think the perspective you're pointing us to there, Rob, is crucial in even getting a perspective about the relatively modern notion of a nation state as such, right? So this is only the last several centuries have we had the notion of a nation, and it is in fact that it wasn't necessarily a religion that drove the most deadly wars in the 20th century. It was a sort of idolatrous identity to nation state, and it's the kind of broad perspective about that I think is really crucial for us to pay a lot of attention to. Let me move to another matter that I think is important. In Rob Schenck, is that how you say Rob's name? Rob Schenck. So in the film, Rob Schenck, an evangelical pastor, talks about some of his history formerly as a right-wing political activist, and he talks about how in those days there was this sort of necessity in his work to stoke fear and anger, and that a lot of times the people that wanted to give him money said, "You've got to stoke up the fear and the anger if we're going to keep pumping money into this." And he said that he feels badly about that. Felt badly about it then, and feels badly about it now. But that just seemed to be part of what he had to do in order to do this kind of work of stoking fear and anger. And there's been a lot of conversation about the way in which we're in this moment with social media and so forth, that we're at this kind of crucible moment of stoking fear and anger. But let me kind of push you just a second and ask you to put the shoe on the other foot just a second And because one of the things that I think I experienced as I watched the film was fear, right? And I mean, for example, the historian Anthea Butler, whoever's interviewing her, is asking her about whether or not she thinks that America might slide into some sort of theocratic, authoritarian state. And the interviewer says, "Does that seem possible?" And Miss Butler replies, "Yes, it's possible. It's absolutely possible. We're closer to it now than we have ever been before. America's on a precipice, and I personally don't know if we're going to stop ourselves from going over the other side." And that's a sort of chilling moment, and it does stir up fear, and it even stirs up some anger. So let me ask you, how did you think about, given the realities that we have about our various silos and our various demonization of the other and the way fear and anger works into that, how did you think about having to tell a compelling story while not wanting to participate in the fear mongering?
I don't think we're not doing it to fearmonger. We're telling what's true. We are on the precipice. This country couldn't be more divided, and we are on the precipice of making a very big decision. Do we want to be an authoritarian state, a fascist state, or do we want to maintain the 248 years of self-rule and democracy? We are at that place. What Rob Schenck was talking about is ginning up fear, ginning up anger. In other words, it may not be there, but we have to gin it up in order to get get revenue, to make money. We're just telling this one person in the film says something that is true. Now, did we do it to make people frightened? No, we just try to tell the truth and then see what they think of it. Dan, what do you feel about that? I mean, I don't think we didn't put it in there to try to get people to get fearful.
Well, I think you hit it on the head about the difference between being disingenuous in stoking fear because it's going to be valuable in your fundraising efforts, and a sincere effort to try to talk about a problem. I think it's something, though, that I thought about quite a lot. The truth is, because I don't ever want to add to the divisiveness. And so the question became how, but but in trying to do this in a movie, trying to do this in film form, part of the reason that you do that is that I think you can deliver a lot of information, a lot of context in a very concentrated way. So people, they see our movie and I think they'll go on a tremendous journey in 90 minutes. And that was the goal, because not everybody is going to be a scholar about it and decide that they're going to read dozens of books on this topic and research it. So you're trying to not just give them the information, which in some cases, may be better. There's other ways to deliver information, but you're trying to give them the information in a dense and concentrated way and trying to attach the appropriate emotion to it, because that's really where the ideas land. If we can really understand what's good about this, what's bad about this, that frightens me. So, of course, that was something that I thought a lot about how can we be faithful to talking about this danger and the severity of this moment without being guilty of fear-mongering, without just fanning the flames and making people, needlessly hysterical. We try to get the balance right. It's always really hard to do. I think, when I ask Anthea Butler if that seems possible, I mean, you don't see my face, I'm not in the film, but hopefully you hear my skepticism. And it's not that she doesn't have a good point. It's that we should all be. That's the moment that you're checking yourself on this fear mongering. Like, is that really possible? Do we really think it's possible? And she's a fantastic scholar. She feels like it is. I certainly. All I want to say is, like, if you look at facts at the evidence of what's happening in the country right now. it would be wrong to say that January 6th was exclusively due to Christian nationalism, but I think it would be wrong to omit that was a central driver. We had an actual insurrection in the United States of America. The government was attacked on this basis. Right now, second in line to the presidency is somebody who's deeply affected by Christian nationalism, the new Speaker of the House. So, that's second in line. The second in line to the presidency right now is saying overtly that he thinks that the only values you need are going to come from the Christian Bible and his interpretation of the Christian Bible, and that's his role on this earth is to make sure he inserts those into our government.
Yeah, I certainly found the line by Russell Moore. He says, "Our definition of what would never happen keeps getting pushed out into more extreme places," and that certainly is a sort of wake-up call for sure to continue to pay attention. Kind of last question on the film, and is you have David French at some point talking about the sort of cocoons that we live in, that we work in. And then he's talking about how some people will say, all sorts of people have asked me to explain MAGA Christianity. And I've said to a lot of folks, if you were immersed in the world they're immersed in, you'd be wearing the red hat also. And so what I hear him saying, and the way I understand what you're doing with that in the film, is you're saying we really have a very difficult situation here because people are in various cultural, social silos, and they're not hearing what people in the other silos are saying. So kind of what's your hope? You've talked about kind of what your hope is for the film, what the film's going to communicate, but what's your hope for making possible getting the people that you would want to see the film or to have an honest conversation about the film? Maybe start with Rob.
Well, I think, I mean, I hate to say it, but, you talked about the reaction to the trailer, and there's a lot of angry pushback. I believe that, and again, I hate to say this, but that might cause people to want to see it. And people who may be very angry going in to see the film, and then hopefully when they come out, just like we used to do on All in the Family, we had people talk about it. We used to be shown to 45 million people every week, and we had Archie's point of view, we had Mike's point of view, the diametrically opposed, but then people talked. They started talking to each other about it. And I think that's what we want to have happen here. We want people to see the film, regardless of what they think the film is going in, go see the film and then have a discussion, have a heated discussion. Just don't punch each other after you see it. Just have a good discussion about it and see where it goes.
Dan, how about you?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think this stuff is so hard to talk about, even in this conversation. We're going to talk about it for an hour and feel like we only just scratched the surface.
Yeah.
So I think, we really, one of the things, it's so hard. It's tearing families apart. People don't know how to talk about it. It's hard to talk about. It's complex. So, one of the ideas that we just have is what we're hoping that people will use it for is just, will you watch this for me? Somebody who is interested in this topic, somebody who sees the film and maybe has had some conflict within their family, wondering if we're, if we're going about this the right way, wondering if this has become politicized in a way that is maybe departing from our faith. And that hopefully the film is something that they could show and say, like, yeah, would you just watch this for me? It's going to be easier than us having this whole conversation and me figuring out where to start. I mean, my gosh, you're going to have some amazing voices who are going to contribute with a lot of authority, some really, really great points. And I don't think anybody can look at those voices and say that they don't love Christianity and that they're not good Christians. But there's a problem here. There's a concern here, and it's affecting it's affecting the church for sure, tearing communities apart, and it's really, really tough on our democracy, because if there is just a decision from this is a leadership. Ultimately, it's a leadership-driven movement. All of these, you alluded to it in Deep History, it's really about consolidating power. But if you can use your faith to consolidate power and to shut down discussion, you can go far. But the history of doing that is really ugly, of what it does to societies.
Yeah. Let me, as we move toward a close here, Rob, let me come back to you and your commentary on All in the Family. And of course, as we all know, Norman Lear recently passed, and my understanding is that you and he were very close and dear friends. But how do you think about how that early work in All in the Family that kind of tried to force us to have dialogue about difficult topics? How do you feel that Norman's influence and that early experience in your acting career has informed your own kind of life vocation?
It's had a tremendous impact on me. I saw, Norman, it was like a second father to me. I knew him since I'm a little kid, and I've been, known him my whole life, and he's like a second father. And what he showed me with that show, and also with his activism, is that you can use your position, whether it's, you're an actor of fame, whatever, to be able to put certain ideas out to the public and get them talking about it. Not many people know, but Norman, one of his favorite plays was a play by George Bernard Shaw called Major Barbara. And in that, if you didn't know that Shaw was a liberal, you would say, well, he presents the pro-war, anti-war position equally. And then the idea is that you watch this play and then you go out and you talk about it. See, well, where do you stand? What do you think about it? That was the way Norman looked at All in the Family. He was, presenting these two ideas. People tuned into that show as a success because half the people agreed with Archie and half the people agreed with Mike. And that's what made it good. And you talked about these things. So he influenced me in that way, and that you can use your art to bring ideas out, to bring political thoughts, to bring issues to the fore. And that's what I've tried to do. I've done that in a number of films, not just in God and Country, but in a number of films like Few Good Men and Ghost of Mississippi and, American President and so on. And you can blend. And not in this case because it's a documentary, but you can blend entertainment and issues, and that has a tremendous influence on me. And I'm going to miss him terribly. I loved him dearly, and even though he lived to 101, it's not enough. You want more. You want more.
Yeah. I remember I have a memory in mind of my wife Laura and I watching A Few Good Men. And that final climactic courtroom scene, and just throughout the whole film, where you bring us into this sort of space where we have to ask very deep questions about ourselves and about our presumptions about what we think is good and true and beautiful, and what's the meaning of life, and what's it like to try to live a good life. And so, those sorts of questions raising, and and obviously I appreciate that just as a college professor, because it's one of the things that we seek to do in good higher education, right? Is to really let people have informed conversations and grapple with stuff, and have better and better questions to carry with them in life. Well, it's been great to talk to you both. I'm grateful for your time. We've been talking to Dan Partland and Rob Reiner about their new film, God and Country. Thank you both, and we're grateful for your time together today.
Thanks for having us, Lee.
Thank you, Lee. It's great to be here.
Hey there, it's Lee. If you're looking for a taste of something new, then I might have the perfect podcast recommendation for you, Gravy. Produced by Southern Foodways Alliance and distributed by APT Podcast Studios, Gravy is the chart-topping and James Beard award-winning podcast. That's like the Oscars of food. They share stories of the changing American South through the foods we love to eat. Not only will these episodes leave your mouth watering, you'll also gain a greater appreciation for the unsung folks who make, grow, and serve Southern food. From unsung biscuit legends to the multi-generational family who've played a key role in Louisiana's oyster industry. So go ahead, follow Gravy on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite listening app. And tell them your Southern friend Lee C. Camp sent you. Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible. Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Sophie Byard, Tom Anderson, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, Harriet Harmon, Jason Sheasley, Ellis Osborne, and Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of PRX, Tokens Media LLC, and
Great Feeling Studios.